Hey, everybody. Welcome, cheaters. Let's test our chat. Testing the chat. Actually, let's move this chat a little bit. There we go. Okay. This is going to be a crazy one. I wasn't actually even planning on doing a stream today. I was just going to think about Merly stuff and work on strategy. But then there were a whole bunch of things that happened yesterday and this morning that made me think, no, I'm going to do this. Just because the ramifications of this, I think, are large. Or at least I think we're at the point with GTT that there's enough people that I think really care about this and understand sort of the way that I'm approaching this channel and these topics, that they may hopefully find value in this. But I want to start by saying that there's a good chance that this is going to be a long stream. And I'm ready for it. I think. Yeah, I've got my soda. I've got the dog locked in. I don't have my headphones, but I might be able to fix that right now. Live. Got my earbuds. This is going to keep me motivated for longer periods of time. I encourage you to do the same if you like that kind of thing. The background techno ambiance, at least for me, is, yeah, pretty good. Okay, cool. I got my Dream Clinic on repeat. I'm ready to go. Here's what I'm listening to. I think there's a couple that are kind of like my favorite, but this is up there. Okay. So, as I mentioned, one of the things that I teach at the university and actually even at Merly is these notions of how to think deeply, and also this idea of rational thought, critical thinking. And I think that there, at least in my experience, there's been maybe a little bit of a disconnect from a lot of people that I think they think very rationally and deeply. And I don't mean this disrespectfully. Excuse me. I mean this just kind of like more factually, based on what I've seen. And then I start working with some of these folks that are of the mind that they have really strong rational thought and critical thinking. And then what we find together is there's lots of room for growth. And again, this is not a criticism. This is why I spend time teaching this now, because what I found is this is like important. And it's important in my mind in almost every aspect of life. I'm going to explain a core principle of rational thought, this idea of degrees of separation. And then I'm going to walk us through how you can apply this to mentor, to windsurf, cursor, all that stuff. This guy on Instagram. We'll also take a look at Mark Roberg.
What do you call a dog?
My buddy here, who's awesome, just found another one of his posts. And also the way that I think about programming, and then how this applies to inner circles. So the point is oh, did I expand this? This is like 5 examples now. Let's just do this. Many examples. The point is that this idea on rational thought, this notion of degrees of separation, is a general concept that I learned when doing my doctorate, and it's changed my life. It's sort of the people at Merle and in my inner circle will often refer to this as I'm playing n-dimensional chess. And yeah, it's sort of like n-dimensional chess. But another way to think about it, maybe a simpler way, is this notion of degrees of separation. But my hope is once you understand the concept of degrees of separation, and then I walk you through a couple examples, you'll see that, oh, you can apply this to your life in almost anything, everything, like literally. And by the way, I want to just start by saying, my recommendation is don't go nuts. You don't have to do this for everything, like what groceries you're going to buy, but you could. And it's a really interesting kind of way to think about things and like maybe optimize your life. But the reason why I mentioned maybe don't go crazy with it is you can go crazy with this. And this isn't meant to cause paranoia, anxiety, any of these things. Some people might argue this is overthinking. And I think if you use it everywhere all the time, I think it could be overthinking. But when used appropriately in spaces where I think it matters, it actually can be very illuminating. And oftentimes, I think it will help you understand what the range of outcomes of things are going to be. And you will likely appear like you're Nostradamus or you're some sort of oracle, because your ability to sort of predict the future is going to increase significantly. Not because you can see the future. You're not like clairvoyant or anything, but because you've done the degrees of separation and you've thought rationally about it and you understand sort of the sphere of influence of each of these actions, and you kind of can see what the range of outcomes can be. Okay, so here's the idea in a nutshell. Okay, the idea of degrees of separation. For any given problem or any given thing that we're interested in, we'll just call this a thing, just to keep the nomenclature as simple as possible. Okay? We have our thing that we're interested in. This thing can be really anything that you want it to be. Now, this is something that we care about, and we're trying to understand how this thing will affect the world or the universe or whatever. Then what we do is we try to essentially create these various degrees of separation. Something like this. Okay? So here's your thing in the middle, and you're trying to understand what is going to happen with this thing in, maybe this is short term. Maybe this next one is midterm. And maybe this last one is long term. Now, these various representations of the short term, midterm, and long term are not how I actually think about this. It's usually far fuzzier, but it's just a very simple diagram so you can try to grok the idea. And what I find is for most people that are not experts in critical thinking, I'm going to write how to think deeply about things. This is one of various different techniques to think deeply about things. So what happens, or what I've seen happen in the world, is oftentimes people will think about things right here. They will have the thing that they're interested in, and they will think just about this thing. Okay? And this will give them insight into what is going on, like right now. Then there's a way to think about this in like a short period of the future. So what's going to happen with this thing as you move in these various different directions? The reason why this is a circle is there's many different types of paths that this thing can grow or migrate toward. And similarly here. Now again, as things shift, the narrative changes. So your starting point of this thing can move, right? Like if so it's heading in this direction, you might end up being more over here. Okay, so you're over here now. I also want to share that this doesn't necessarily have to do with time. It's really important to understand this. It's not bound to a temporal analysis. So right now, I've drawn it in the way that you might think about short-term, mid-term, and long-term, mostly to help emphasize some of the points, especially related to this guy on Instagram and maybe some of these things here. But when you start to think about other things like this or this, these can be just different ways to reason about outcomes and behaviors. So the idea, again, is it's a degree of separation. So you're starting with this initial thing, and then you're going to move a little bit forward. So let's use the groceries example as our starting point just to help drive home the point. So you're going to go do your grocery shopping. That's the thing. And you're trying to figure out what kind of groceries you're going to buy. So you can just arbitrarily buy all the random stuff that you want, or you could understand you're going to do grocery shopping. And before you shop, you can ask some questions like, what is the short-term kind of need that I have for these things? Uh-oh. I think let me redraw this. There we go. So you're thinking about, or what am I low on stock for? I'm low on milk and crackers and cheese and all this stuff. And so you're like, I'm going to get those things. Okay. So sure. That's maybe your short-term analysis. Again, keep in mind, this is degrees of separation. It doesn't have to be about the temporal piece. It can be related to other things. But in this example, let's just think about this. So this is going to address the short-term aspect of like what you need for food. So yeah, you restock the things you're low on. Now the midterm, which could be an additional degree of separation, could have very little to do with the actual food that you need to restock, but more the impact that this is going to have on your health. The groceries that you're going to buy. Why? Because the groceries that you're going to buy are more likely than not the things that you're going to eat. And when you eat those things over a long period of time or a mid period of time, it's going to have certain consequences. Those consequences can be good or bad. And so this thing that you're doing now, when you think about it a little bit more in terms of these degrees of separation, you can start to reason about how if you make smart decisions here, this could send you in a direction that is beneficial for you. Okay. This is maybe a second degree of separation. So the first is we're restocking things that we actually need. The second is we're thinking about the actual health ramifications. Third thing, maybe this is about the family, not about you. It's about what about the kids, the partner, the dog? What is this going to do for them over this longer period of time? Are we going to create bad eating habits for them? That's what this long term could be. It could also be, what about the financial implications of this? So here we're thinking about just the food we need to get. Here we're thinking about the actual sort of fitness and health ramifications. Here we're thinking about these financial types of ramifications. Now, these could all be seen as sort of things that are happening or are as a byproduct of the groceries. You can also see that they aren't necessarily just immediate. They don't necessarily all have the same ramification temporally, which is why we talk about degrees of separation. The short term, this is going to affect you maybe today. So if you're out of soda, then you have no soda, and maybe that's going to make you sad. So yeah, let's get our soda. Long term or longerish term, if you're just drinking soda, then that could be pretty bad for your health. And so let's not just do that. Let's also be drinking water, right? So we got that too. And then, that's midterm. And then the long term is, well, what about the financial implications or the family? So let's make sure that the dog also has good water. Like, actually, this is something I do with my dog. I'm not saying that you should do this, but I think, like, at least the water in my neighborhood is not like super great to drink. And it dawned on me, well, for quite some time, that if it's not good enough for me to drink, I don't think it's good enough for my dog to drink. So he gets, yes, I love my dog a lot. I'm not saying you have to do this. I'm just saying I love my dog, and if I'm not drinking that water, he's not drinking that water. So, but this other part is the financial implications, right? And you can see how this could be more long-term, because this decision is compounded over a long period of time. If you're buying things frugally, like, for example, most of the shopping that I do online, and I buy a little bit more in bulk. And the implications of those decisions have long-term effects to essentially reduce the cost over this large period of time. And I know this because I've spent time thinking about this. And so I optimize on this over a long period of time. I also am thinking about the midterm, right? How does this make me feel, in terms of nutrition, these types of things. What's this going to do for my personal goals as far as exercise, weight training? And so I'm thinking about those things. And I'm also thinking about, like, what are the things I actually need, right? So this is a very simple example to demonstrate the concept of degrees of separation. Here we have something that is as easy as buying groceries, which maybe we don't spend that much time thinking about. We just think it's groceries. Like, just buy the bread, buy the milk. But you can perhaps start to see that these simple decisions, when made over a longer period of time, can have very interesting consequences that you can reason about very clearly. This is not, again, magic. There's nothing special about this. It's just sitting down and just trying to understand, like, what are the consequences of these things that are happening? And this is one of the ways that I teach the students and the folks that I work with how to think about things in a very deep and rational, logical way. Notice that there's very little emotion in this. I'm just thinking about the things that we are agreed perhaps on buying. We're thinking about the implications that these can have for our health or whatnot. And then the financial. This is not like an emotional decision. It can be one if you start making decisions about things that maybe align for your personal health that are more delayed gratification. And so you're not going to necessarily get the immediate dopamine hit or pleasure sensor hit from the instant gratification. But my view, I think, as many of you know, is less instant gratification, more delayed gratification. And this is perhaps an example of that. Because if any of you are watching this, you're spending time right now potentially learning or relearning a concept that could help you long term. You may not get value from this immediately, but this mechanism, I think, can really help you start to think about things in a very crystallized way. Okay, so this is the general concept. We understand this degrees of separation. Now, I would like to give you some concrete examples on ways that you can apply this outside of this grocery example. And I want to do this because these are some conversations that I've had with folks recently. And it became obvious to me that there might be some disconnect in what people might be seeing or thinking that's going on versus like what the ramifications of these things might be more long term. Yeah. Okay. So let's start with the value of mentor. So you have mentor, and one of the questions that I was having recently with one of my investors is they're asking this question: if you had to do Merle all over again, what would you change? It's sort of like, what have you learned? How have you grown? And I mentioned a number of things. I would probably hire differently. I think I'm just sharing sort of what I like actually said to this person. I'm not going to mention who it was, but I went through a bunch of things that I think I could have done better. And I think that I didn't necessarily make all of the best hiring decisions. I would hire potentially differently, really targeting on people that are very fiery about working and staying away from folks that I think don't necessarily have that fire. I'll limit it at that, but I think examples of this could be someone that's very fiery and is about working and doing incredible things. Might be someone like Taylor Dolezal or Urs Muff. Both of those guys, I think, are great examples of people that have an internal fire in them and they really want to do things, if for no other reason than just the sake of doing things. And doing a startup, I think you very much want people of that makeup. And that doesn't mean that people that aren't that way don't have value. I think they can have tremendous value, but maybe not necessarily like in the startup space. I mentioned some other things on decisions around how to approach the product, but I didn't say that I would change the product focus. And I think that that might have been like a little bit surprising. So like why is it that the product focus with Mentor is something that I feel very firm about? Well, it has to do with the degrees of separation, right? So let's look at this from a programming perspective. That let's say that this thing that we're trying to build is software now. So we're going to try to build software. And for people who have never built software before, it's often the case that what they tend to think about, and I say this from like my own experience in building software, back before I had really built sort of industrial strength software, is I thought building software was principally about writing code. And I now that I've been doing this for 30 years, I have a very strong conviction that that is entirely wrong. There's only a very small part of software development that has to do with writing code. The majority of software development for commercial grade systems has almost nothing to do with writing code, and that is not an opinion. That is a fact. And you can tell by, actually, let's pick a less, maybe we'll pick, these are all, here, let's just get this out of here. Let's look at something that's maybe pretty good. Argo CD. Okay, cool. So check this out. Let's just try to quantify the claim that I just made about writing code. So here you have this repository, Argo CD, and it started in 2018, it appears. And then it's been running until this is 2025. And you can see that it currently is about 350,000 lines of code. I want to share that for the supercoders that I know, or even the AI systems that I think exist today, they can crank out 350,000 lines of code in a few months. Probably faster than that. A few months is conservative. Human supercoders can do this much code in a few months. The AI systems can probably do this, let's say, like in a few weeks, right? So then this goes against my point, right? Because then if it's all about generating code, then these AI systems can generate code significantly faster, and they'd get to 350,000 lines, and then it takes them just a couple weeks, and they've got Argo. Except they won't. Not really. What they would have is a whole bunch of code that probably doesn't work. It's probably broken in 10,000 different ways. It has major performance issues. It doesn't actually make sense. It's not modular. It can't really be extended. It's basically just spaghetti code that's mostly garbage. And you can see examples of that from some of the prior VODs that we did when we were looking at some of the suggestions that are coming out of these code generators. What you see in actual software development for production quality systems is it's generally a very slow increase in lines of code. Why? Because writing code is not the actual task of software development. It's a very small portion of it. And again, if you don't believe me, just look at the data, and the data will show you approximately 70% of the time that software developers spend is understanding code. It's just thinking about code. Because what they're trying to do is make a change to the system that will fix a bug, improve the performance, add a new feature, something of that nature, and not break everything else. This is the key piece, right? So think about it like this. Imagine that you're a writer for Game of Thrones, all right? And you're thrown in to season 7, and you're asked to expand the story. Now, you could just write a whole bunch of stuff, like a whole bunch of nonsense, and expand the story. And you'd probably be fired the next week because the things that you're providing are nonsensical. They don't make sense in the larger context of the existing story. Sorry, I'm fighting with I love my mic wants to get super close to me, but it is too excited to get close to me. Chill, buddy. Okay. So then, as you can see from this example, anything that is potentially sufficiently complicated, the story is not so much about just like producing. It's producing things with an incredible level of fidelity that fit within the narrative of the existing system. That's why writing code is not the core challenge of large-scale software development and production quality software. The core challenge is trying to make sure that the code that we're writing, or one of the core challenges, is fitting within the framework of the software system and making that code better. This is why I believe Linus Torvalds talks about how he doesn't really care about code assistants writing code. He wants code assistants to help developers fix bugs and help with code reviews. Why? Because humans perpetually make these mistakes in code reviews and in defects. It's a perpetual problem for software. And as you can clearly see with the AI systems, it's not going away. It's actually far more sophisticated than I think a lot of the companies that are in this space may have thought, perhaps. I guess maybe I should not speculate, but there's a reason why Mentor doesn't focus on this, and that writing code, at least for software developers that are doing production quality, has not necessarily been the issue. It's about writing high quality code and then doing that, potentially faster. But more importantly, I think high quality for at least the software systems that I'm talking about, because they're production, those systems care more about quality than speed, because all it takes is maybe like one security vulnerability and you can be cooked for forever, right? So now, when you go back to this degrees of separation, this initial thing of writing software, the short term could be considered write code. That's what I got to write code, okay? Sure. You're going to have to do that initially. What about this next level? Next level is, okay, it's going to be less about writing code. It's going to be more about making sure that like the system, it can grow without the system breaking. Okay. All right. What about this one out here? This one is probably, okay, let's try to make sure that we can add modularity to the system. It's readable. We can onboard people. They can understand the system. We can fix bugs without breaking the system. And more now, it's about, again, the long game, the degrees of abstraction, degrees of separation, this is more about making sure that you have a product that can sustain over a long period of time, and you can make changes to it and improve it without breaking things. This is, I think, where the core challenge is with software development for production quality systems. It's further out here. So again, when we look at this problem and we look at systems like the vibe coders, the vibe coding systems, I think that they are adding value in this little area here. And they also add value for developers or for people that don't know how to write code, because now they can do something that they couldn't do before. But unlike chatbots and things that are more one-off in nature, software development is not that way. Software development is iterative. It uses iterative refinement, as we've discussed many times, which means that this is not the end of the story, right? One could liken this to writing a book, is that initially you might be setting out to write a story, and then after you write the initial story, there's going to be some editing, right? Maybe that's the second degree of separation. And then with that editing, the focus now is not about creating new original content. It's about making sure that there's synergy in the stories and that it's grammatically correct and there's believable characters, this type of thing. Now, with those stories, with those books or those movies, notice though that once you finish it, it's done in some sense. I mean, I realize there are like the director cuts and all of these sort of things, but the original 3 Star Wars movies, that's maybe even a good example, is I think George Lucas did come back and make changes to those movies, but the general story stayed the same. And often I think like a lot of people were not super thrilled by some of the changes that he made, right? But most movies don't do that. Most movies, like when you're done, you're kind of done, right? Same with books, is you write the book and then you're done. Now, I realize there are some corner cases with books. You got like the 15th edition and they're continuing to do the errata, but the core premise of the book doesn't massively change, right? Software can actually move in very different directions than it originally was targeting. An example of that might be the Windows operating system. Look at the original Windows operating system from the 1980s, maybe? Windows 3. Yeah, I don't even know. When did I start using Windows? But I think maybe it was all command line. And then you had a little bit of a user, like a graphical user interface as it evolved. And now you have what exists today. And the command line, I think, is still there to some degree. But even that has been massively revamped. So the point is that when you start thinking about these topics and these domains, and you think about them in a way that is specialized to the actual relevance of the topic, like we're talking about software here, not writing books. So the degrees of separation and the things of impact are different than you would have with writing a book or creating a movie. And because of that, it changes the way that you think about the problem. So when we go back to Mentor, my initial thought on this, and many people have asked this question, is why are you not making Mentor a code assistant and just have it write code? I don't think that that's the real problem in software engineering. And I think there's an enormous amount of data that argue that the real challenge in production quality software engineering that I'm talking about, not prototypes. Prototypes, I think, actually are very much just about generating a whole bunch of code to do demonstration of an idea And for that space, I think code generators like Windsurf and Cursor and Copilot, I think those are fantastic tools for that problem. I'm not interested in that problem. I'm interested in making this kind of software better. And a big thing that Mentor helps with is it helps with issues. And the idea that it's founded on is that, again, going many layers out, is that as we got to this long term, we noticed that a large aspect of the problem is to maintain the code in a way that things are not getting broken. And this is the key area where Mentor helps. Mentor does analysis of the entire software system completely in an automated fashion. And then it looks in all the dark corners of the system and then identifies problems and attempts to fix them. And the argument was those issues that arise, those happen in perpetuity. Those issues will never go away. And this is, I think, one example of that. The red line here are the issues that we have with OpenSSL. And you can see it's increasing, right? And so this is what they're having without using Mentor. Even with Mentor, Mentor is going to help them bring this down each time. Like, let's say they fix all the things that Mentor finds, it comes down to 0. It still jumps up the next time they iterate. Then Mentor helps them fix it, it comes down. Then they introduce more errors, Mentor helps fix, it comes down. So you can see now that when you use the degrees of separation thinking, you can start to solve problems in ways that add value in perpetuity. They will help you with your long game. They are not going to be necessarily a flash in the pan in terms of they will solve the immediate problem, but long term they'll have limited value. And it's because of the way that you think about these things. Most people, their thinking is here. It's right in this small little space. Like, this happened. A lot of times people just think, oh, this is where we are today. What could we do with this? And then they say, oh, we have language models, and how about we just use them to write code? Cool. Let's do that. Okay. What does that solve? Well, then you would start thinking about this, and then you start thinking about this. And then if you thought about it a little bit longer, you'd realize that, oh, that's right. That's not actually what the real problems in software development are. Not production grade, but they can help with learning, or they can help with prototyping, which I think they absolutely do. But understand that, like, that is essentially the range that they can help based on a variety of current limitations. At least that's my relatively strong conviction. Yeah, based on the current technology. But one thing that is very clear to me is that the issues that we have in software, they are continuing to elude humans, just like Linus Torvalds was mentioning, and what I've seen myself in working on massive software systems. And so having an AI that helps the humans with things that they don't do well would be helpful. Like, for example, if humans wrote perfect code every time, ask yourself this question: why do we have a code review process? If humans are writing like outstanding code and they're not introducing any bugs, wouldn't code reviews be a complete waste of time? Logically, that seems to make sense. Except we have these things called PRs, pull requests, which are fundamentally about other humans reviewing the original human's code. Why? Because we don't trust a single human to write that code, because we know that they do things like this. So if you're building a technology, like, again, notice the humans can write code. They just can't write reliably correct code. And we have all of this empirical data that demonstrate this. So if you were building an AI system based on a deep understanding of software development, and you know that this is a problem that occurs in perpetuity, and you're trying to make humans faster and have better quality, yeah, I think that, at least for me, and I don't mean this arrogantly, I mean, like, this is, again, what happens when you think about it like this. Now, I want to be clear. I think that helping humans that don't know how to write code solves a very different problem, which is not assisting with the improvement of production quality software, which is not the problem that I'm necessarily interested in or Merle's interested in. But I think that that is very helpful. And I think that it's a great way to get people that don't know or haven't worked much with software development a gateway into maybe starting to develop software. So hopefully this gives a little example of how you can apply some of the degrees of separation when you start to think about ideas that you might want to look into with creating a startup or a research idea. And in fact, I think we can watch. I think I'm going to close this one. I think we can watch Mark talk about this, because he's going to make an interesting point, I think, about this degrees of separation in terms of technical moat. And keep in mind, Mark's background, Professor Mark here, is he's sort of a world famous go-to-market guy, and he's a former chief revenue officer, I think, for HubSpot, and he grew that company from like zero to several $billion of revenue. And he teaches this also at Harvard Business School. So to say that he's one of the world's foremost experts is in this space of thinking about go-to-market and how to build startups is probably like a massive understatement. So let's hear what he has to say.
You're going to find out how long is it going to take them to build that feature? I don't know, like 2 months. It's not a moat. So here's your litmus test for moat. Imagine you took off. You go from 1 to 5 to 15, whatever, over 3 years. And suddenly a group of entrepreneurs, like great engineers out of like Meta or Google or wherever, leave. And they're like, we're going to reverse engineer your product, just rebuild it and sell it for half the price. And Sequoia gives them 20 million bucks to go do it. So they're going to do that. How do you still win when these ankle biters are out there selling your exact product for half the price? That's the moat. Do I invest this $1 million in growth, or do I invest this $1 million in further moat development? And when you start a business, usually you have a hypothesis toward a moat, but you haven't built it yet. And people often get confused on like, so what's your moat? Like, well, we have this feature. Let's say you're right, and you have a great quarter and a great next quarter because everyone's buying you because of this feature. The competition is going to find out how long is it going to take them to build that feature. I don't know, like 2 months. It's not a moat. So here's your litmus test for moat.
It's not a moat. And when we were creating Merle, and again, this requires sort of a deep understanding of this space that you're working in. And I realize if you're working in an area that you don't have decades of experience, you may not have all that. And I'm probably going to give some advice that a lot of people may not want to hear. But I'm going to give it anyway, because I still feel like it's the right thing to do. I think that there's a lot of confusion in the world about creating successful startups. There's this notion that like the average age of the startup founder is like 25 or something, and they're all college dropouts. And, you got to quit Stanford to create your startup. Otherwise, it's too late. The truth is, if you look at the data, not anecdotal, like the one-offs that people want to latch onto, which is Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates. But if you look at the whole picture, what we see is the average age of startup founders, I think, is 47. 47. And I think that that's for startups that get to Series A, something like this. And as I think most of us know, most startups fail within the first year, and 99.9% of the startups that get created never get to the point to where they can even get any kind of investment funding from external parties, especially institutional ones like venture capitalists like Mark here. And honestly, I think a big reason for that is there's a lot of people that are listening to salacious news that is kind of giving them the wrong advice. There's, I think, a New York University professor who talks about this, and I think the way that he describes it is use your 20s to find really good mentors and learn as much as you possibly can and build. Use your 30s to then start to collaborate more with peers and start to establish a small amount of leadership and experience in doing sort of bigger things rather than just being the assistant. Use your 40s to sort of close the gap from being a junior leader to more of a senior leader. And at that point, when you feel you've like reached some clip, then create your startup. Now, in all fairness, I've created 2 startups. Nautica, I created when I was 25. But keep in mind, this was not VC backed. There's not likely any chance that I would get VC funding, to be honest. It was just a hobbyist thing. And I did it mostly just to learn how to code. And I'm cut from a very different cloth in that once I start to do something, I kind of just stick with that thing for very long periods of time. And I think part of the reason why Nautica ended up being at least a real product is I just power through these things. That's just sort of in my DNA. But would anyone consider Nautica, I think, like some wild success, like it in terms of at least how the salacious media would consider it? Definitely not. And if that's your goal with a startup, right? Your goal is you want to be the next Mark Zuckerberg, then doing it before you really know what you're doing, it's maybe not the best strategy. Again, you do you, but me then creating Merly almost 25 years later, I think I created Merly actually we created Merly, I think I was 47. And my 2 co-founders were both over 50. So hopefully that gives you some sense, right? And I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying, like, I think there's a reason why they talk about the successful startups happening from people that are, the average age is 47. Is that you just kind of have to know a lot of things about a lot of things. And on top of that, one of the most challenging things to do is get investors that will support you. And if you have no history and you weren't like born into wealth and you're not famous or something, it can be really hard to get people to believe in you because there's no data, right? They want to see the data that would support that you can do this thing. And if that data doesn't exist, then it can be challenging. I mean, maybe invert the story and imagine what if it was that you're the investor and 10,000 people want your money. Who do you pick? Okay. So that's maybe the first example I want to show on Instagram. Now I want to show this second example of this guy. And I want to be clear that I don't, my goal is not to put him on the microscope and disagree with him. I'm just going to try to show you how we can look at what he's saying, and then we can do this degrees of separation, and we can quickly show that, yeah, really though. So let's see what he has to say. By the way, I even commented and I said that, I think this is a good take. At least I think it's a good take here. But then I think once you get beyond that point, then I think I'm not totally convinced. Okay, let's see what he has to say.
What do you search, Google or AI? I don't think you guys have realized what just happened last week in the tech space. It was huge. Microsoft, out of all companies, is now worth more than Google. You know why? Because we don't like to search Google anymore. We just want to talk to AI and not see any ads. And guess who's pushing ads and whose business model is heavily reliant on ads? I'll give you 2 seconds. Yes, over 70% of Google's strategy for revenue is reliant on advertisements, and people don't search for things anymore. Google ads don't work as much anymore, probably YouTube. But Microsoft, having so many modes of operations, moving so ferociously in quantum computing and AI, software development, they have recurring software, they have gaming that actually works, they don't have to cancel projects. And just wait until boomers realize that you don't have to use Google anymore, that you can just use AI. This is just the tip of the iceberg. What do you search?
So just to be clear, I don't necessarily disagree with the higher order point that he's making, which is using AI for search or things that are more subjective in nature is, I think, a very valuable mechanism for using them. I do want to say I think he veers off a little bit in the deep end with some of the things that he starts talking about, like canceling games and quantum and stuff. Google isn't perfect, and I'm not trying to support either Google or Microsoft, but Microsoft has had some pretty big missteps as well. And Google also has its own AI systems that you can use, and it's at the top of almost all the searches, which is invoking Gemini. But I want to watch this one more time, and then I want to just sort of dissect this just a little bit to get at the heart of maybe what he's trying to argue.
Search Google or AI? I don't think you guys have realized what just happened last week in the tech space. It was huge. Microsoft, out of all companies, is now worth more than Google. You know why? Because we don't like to search Google anymore. We just want to talk to AI and not see any ads. And guess who's pushing ads and whose business model is heavily reliant?
So it appears that his key argument is that we just want to do these searches and we don't want to see ads. And I think that's right. I want to do searches and I don't want to see ads. In fact, I get annoyed by seeing the 15 ads at the top as well. And I think he's also quite right, based on the data that I have, that Google's business model is largely influenced by ad revenue, right? I will constantly say that Google is not necessarily a technology company, they're an advertising company. I think they've shifted away from that, at least to some degree. But there was a time where that was basically their primary thing. Now they have products, and the Android ecosystem makes them quite a bit of money from the App Store and other things. But he's not wrong, I think, about Google's fundamental source of income being ad revenue. And so if we look at this, his initial point of Microsoft is worth more than Google. This is where he is. And then I think he might be doing a little bit of this is like the future, because like he's thinking about the short term. The future is AI, not the Google search. So it's basically AI search rather than sort of, let's just call it a heuristic search. And I think that there's a good argument that he's right, that I think AI search is, maybe augmented with heuristic search is I think, likely the future. So I don't actually disagree with that. I think that take is right on the money. I think that he's onto something. But now let's go like a little bit further. Let's employ this degrees of separation. So one of his core arguments is the reason why people are using this is AIs don't show ads. I think that's mostly true. AIs, I think, don't show ads today. Do you really think that AIs are not going to be showing ads tomorrow? Like, these AI systems, these are products that come from companies that have business models and need to make revenue. Microsoft does tons of ads. They're just not nearly, I think, as good with their advertising as Google is. And they've tried to infiltrate the search space and sort of dethrone Google for maybe decades now. And largely, I think, being unsuccessful with their attempts to do this with things like Bing. And I'm just looking at the data here. I'm not trying to beat up Microsoft in any capacity. Oh, yes. I think that's 100% right, Lisa, is that if you go too deep and they start to show these answers that are no longer factually correct, I think things start to go really sideways. Which is why I think that you're going to need to likely augment them. So they use heuristic search to do some sort of validation on the outputs. So they're not purely giving you sort of the unsubstantiated thoughts that the AIs give, which can be somewhat dubious. And if you want to see an example of this, there's this MP3 player that I love, because I'm like constant music guy. And there's an episode we have where we talk to Perplexity and ask Perplexity to tell us about how to use the internal mic on this device. And Perplexity tells us over and over, there is no internal mic on this device, except there is. And if you read the specification, it very clearly says that there is an internal mic. So what's going on with the AI? And I think this reinforces Lisa's point that if you start to rely on the things that they're telling you as fact, as we've sort of gotten used to with maybe some of these traditional searches, you might start going off the deep end and getting into answers that are not going to be very helpful. And we've seen examples of this already where AI coding assistants are writing code that's has security vulnerabilities. We have lawyers creating cases that are constructed by these AI systems that are introducing fabricated historical outcomes of cases, and even like invented sort of legislation, I think, in some cases. Like there's a lot of dubiousness in the factual correctness of these things, that their hallucinations or confabulations are, in many cases for language models, they are in the DNA of those systems, which is why, again, we argue that you should really build these things using deterministic AI that can have logical foundations at the core, and then use these other things on top that can be then potentially validated. So I agree with this point, but to go a little bit further, let's assume for a moment that these AI searches are going to have all of the awesomeness that the historical searches have. They're going to be factually correct. They're going to give us more information. Let's just assume that they're just overall better. His initial argument was a big reason why people are using these is they don't have ads. Degree of separation, future ads. Why? How else will they cover the cost of doing inference and producing these results? These companies are for-profit companies. They need to make revenue in some way. And this is, as you can see, I think maybe from my comment, is a good take, except LLMs for searching is going to have ads or paid subs in a short clip. It's the land, expand, and demand model. And if you don't believe me that this is how it's done, just look at the evolution of Uber. There was a time when when Uber was first sort of establishing itself in San Francisco, and I'm in NorCal, so I have maybe early access to Uber. And what we saw initially with Uber is they were super inexpensive. I mean, we're talking, it was maybe 1/3 the cost of taxis. And so a lot of people just started using Uber. This is the land, expand, and demand type model. So the idea is you land and you're trying to get subs. So you're trying to get people to adopt this. And so you essentially make the cost invisible. There is no cost, or you're undercutting the competition significantly that people would just be crazy not to use it. Then you expand. You essentially try to corner the market, basically get everyone to switch into your business model, which is again what Uber did. And then you have the demand and you inflate the prices. So now if you compare Uber with cabs, what I generally find is Uber's more expensive. I just take cabs. Cabs are actually more cost effective now. And Uber, I think, is betting on the fact that Uber has more convenience. And I think that at airports, cabs, I think, oftentimes are more convenient. They tend to be actually faster. But I do think Uber Eats is actually pretty convenient, and I kind of use it in that capacity now. So that's like an example of this. So then Lisa's got another comment. I meant with AI product making features that you start building your entire business on, like specific, you won't leave it even if they start. Oh, I see. Oh, I see. Okay. So sorry, I misunderstood what Lisa was saying. So I think now I'm understanding is, yes. So she's saying that if you start to build a product that's based entirely around those AI systems, that you now are sort of embroiled. You're sort of married to them. And then there's very little you can do. You're now kind of stuck with those ads or those increased prices. And I think that's also absolutely correct. And that I think is pretty dangerous, and it somewhat elegantly dovetails into the next topic that I wanted to cover, which is awesome, which is what's going on with windsurf. But to give a little bit background, I want to talk first about Cursor, and then we'll get into windsurf, and then we'll again follow these degrees of separation, but it will, I think, dovetail very nicely into, I think, Lisa's point about the challenges of if you end up relying on these AI systems and then they do things that you don't necessarily love, you could be in a lot of trouble. Okay, so the background here, if you're not aware, Windsurf and Cursor are two fairly prominent code assistant systems. Windsurf, I think, used to be Codium. Cursor is from this company, Anysphere, and they're sort of, I think, duking out the vibe coding space. Cursor, I think, is getting a lot of traction and claiming really incredible revenue numbers. They're backed by Andreessen and Horowitz, and yeah, interesting stuff. I actually think that their seed funding was with OpenAI, and this is sort of an important piece of data because initially I think Cursor was using OpenAI's models to drive their software development stuff. Now, both Windsurf and Cursor, as I understand it, follow the Perplexity model, which is they don't build their own models. They just leverage the existing models, the existing AIs, thus the tie-in to Lisa's point, and they're building on top of that. Okay. So what Cursor did originally is they're building off of OpenAI's models, and then recently they made a switch to, I think, use Anthropic's models, the Claude models, and Windsurf, I think, right out of the gate might have been using the Anthropic models, using Claude. So now you have these two software development code assistants, neither of which have their own AI models, but they're both using Anthropic's models. Okay. The first piece that comes out is Anthropic decides, why don't we just build our own software development thing? And so they're working on that to basically boot both of these folks. Then there's this very interesting, or essentially try to compete directly with them, right? Because again, it's their model. And part of the approach that I think Windsurf and Cursor have is that the Anthropics and the OpenAIs, their hands are so tied with model generation that they can win the space by focusing just on the end product, very much like what Perplexity is doing. So they'll say, let the model creators focus on model creation. We'll work on the end product. It's very similar to like what GitHub did, I think, with Git. Is the Linux Foundation created Git, and then GitHub said, wow, Git's really hard to use. Let's create GitHub. And then like a large majority of people are using GitHub now. Not because GitHub created Git, but because their user interface and their productization is better than the original Git, I think, right out of the box. And I think probably Linus would agree with that. That's my conviction anyway. Okay, so then recently, OpenAI decided that they want to have their own software development code assistant thing, and they went to try to acquire Cursor, as I understand it, and Cursor essentially turned them down and said no. Now, again, this is interesting, I think, because initially Cursor was funded, and I think their early seed round, by OpenAI, and I think they were using the OpenAI models. And then for their Series A or something, they got funded by Andreessen, and then they switched to the Anthropic model. So there's like, I don't know the details of the loss of love, but clearly there's some stuff going on, right? Then you have Windsurf. So OpenAI approaches Windsurf, and then Windsurf essentially, as I understand it, agrees to be acquired by OpenAI. Okay. So now we have our degrees of separation here. This is our new thing. All right. This is, again, first we did groceries, then we did the value of mentor, or this is our fourth thing. Then we did the guy on Instagram. Now we're doing the Windsurf situation. So the Windsurf situation is they're being acquired by OpenAI. What do we think ramifications might be given this complicated space, right? Again, we have to have some base knowledge to be able to properly think about this, but it's important to understand that Anthropic and OpenAI are sort of they're not necessarily friendly with each other. And in fact, Anthropic was created, as I understand it, by a bunch of sort of defectors from OpenAI And a lot of people are arguing that Anthropic is kind of winning the like the AI model war, at least right now. So here you have Windsurf that is getting acquired by OpenAI. And this is like a multi-billion-dollar deal. And probably Windsurf and OpenAI are super thrilled about the future. But again, if you just think about the degrees of separation, it should be super clear that this might not be the marriage made in heaven that everyone is talking about because of a really important detail. I'm trying to figure out if this is the article that covers it. Let's quickly skim this. OpenAI, this might just be the background. OpenAI agrees to buy Windsurf for about $3 billion. This was a month ago. OpenAI has agreed to buy the AI code assistant tool Windsurf for about $3 billion, blah, blah, blah. OpenAI declined to comment, and Windsurf, formerly known as Codium, and they were valued at this, and so on and so forth. None of these details, I think, really matter that much to us. Yeah, okay. This is just the background. Okay, so let's take a look at the new news that we have from TechCrunch as of a couple days ago. Windsurf says Anthropic is limiting its direct access to Claude AI models. Okay. Windsurf, popular vibe coding startup that's reportedly being acquired by OpenAI, says Anthropic significantly reduced its first-party access to Claude, so on and so forth. Less than 5 days of notice, Anthropic decided to cut off nearly all of our first-party capacity to Claude. Okay. Is this surprising? Like, if you do the degrees of separation, right? And again, this is why I do this. So I can try to understand the consequences. And again, this sometimes when I will talk to folks, they will say, like, we don't understand how you can see these things. How could you possibly predict that this was going to happen? It's not magic. It's just thinking deeply. Is you're looking at this situation, and you're saying, here is Windsurf, and Windsurf is using Anthropic's models. Windsurf agrees to get acquired by OpenAI. OpenAI and Anthropic do not like each other. Why would Anthropic allow a company that is now being owned by OpenAI to continue to use their models to benefit OpenAI? They wouldn't. So then this happens. And now Windsurf no longer has access to Claude's models. This actually shouldn't be surprising to anyone that's paying attention. It's not surprising. It's just sort of like the natural chess move. It's actually really simple. And now Windsurf is potentially in a very bad situation because their product, which maybe could compete with Cursor, because both of these guys are using the Claude models, these guys essentially have no access to Claude. And keep in mind, as a business, Anthropic is under no legal requirement to give access to any company for their AI models. They don't have to do this, right? It's based on whether or not they want to do business with this company, right? So for example, there's some companies that want to work with Merly, and I don't necessarily love their ethics, and so we just passed, right? So as a company, Anthropic is well within their rights to say, no, we don't want to do business with you, so you can just go use someone else's model. Now we go back to Lisa's point. So here's Windsurf, where they're building this product entirely around this AI model that has specific features or strengths for Claude. And now suddenly they no longer have access to Claude. This is crazy in my mind that they somehow are surprised by this outcome. Again, if you just do the simple degrees of separation and think strategically, like, gee, if we get acquired by OpenAI, will Anthropic like cut us off? Probably. Maybe we shouldn't do this then. Maybe that's why Cursor passed. Is Cursor was using the OpenAI models, and then they graduated to the Claude, and they had the same thought, is like, oh, that would be cool, but we're going to kill this product, and we want the product to actually be useful. Degrees of separation. If we think like this, we can literally see the future. And oftentimes it's really simple. It's not complicated. It's just understanding the layout of the chessboard and then trying to imagine, if I move my knight here, they'll move their bishop here, and then I'll move this pawn here. And you're like, oh, that's how this is going to go. Let's not do that. Let's go in this direction. And this is, again, what I teach at the university. And this is part of the reason why when I ask my students about rational thought, critical thinking, I think many of them are like, yes, I think I now am starting to learn how to really critically think. And keep in mind, this is why I was saying, I don't know that you want to go way down the depths of the degrees of separation on everything, because you could, and now, like, this might be an overthinking. But for things that matter, like, for example, you're about ready to get your company acquired by a company that has models that are the rival of the models that you're using to make your company successful. And again, maybe, part of it is, like, if we think about from their perspective, maybe they knew this was going to happen. Maybe they actually knew that Anthropic was creating their own system and that Anthropic was going to scoop them. And they're like, we're going to be scooped. Let's just take the buyout and let OpenAI and Anthropic fight it out. We don't know those details, and likely they're never going to tell us. But that is entirely possible, that they could have anticipated this outcome and said, yeah, it's fine. We're going to be golden. We're going to cash out and be done. But anyone that is maybe surprised by this outcome, I think, like, that's the part that, like this TechCrunch article, the way that it's like this salacious thing, but it's sort of like, well, obviously, like, but what else would they do? There should be like surprised question mark. So Lisa says, this represents how human nature can affect the nature of your business positively or negatively. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And it's something that you, I think, really should be paying attention to as a business owner or someone that's involved in, like, the strategic decisions of your company. And if you haven't seen it, there's this show, Super Pumped, I think, about Uber, that will, maybe this is 2 words, I can't remember, but this will give you some insight on, I think, Lisa's, there's at least one, there's several pieces, I think, actually, where human nature, I think, actually precedes the business nature aspects, and they, like, people's personal emotions take precedence over business decisions. And if you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend it. It's if you are, if you can't listen to profanity, this is not the show for you. But if you can, I think that, at least for me, I got a kick out of it. I thought it was pretty funny, especially because I think it's quite on point in many cases on like startups and that type of thing. Okay, so I think we've talked about the windsurf example and Mentor and the guy on Instagram. I think we'll skip the programming, but hopefully you can see the correlation on programming and why I will talk about the things I care about with code. And oftentimes they're not these things. I'm thinking out here. So if you rewatch some of those VODs and you keep this in mind and then say, oh, that's why he's so keen on us not using literals, is he's already trying to future-proof. He's trying to solve this problem. So then by the time we get here, it's not a problem. And that's exactly what I'm doing. Is oftentimes for new programmers, they don't see the value, but like the senior level folks, the principals or the architects, they're like, oh, well, yes, of course, right? So for those of you new programmers, now that you understand this notion of degrees of separation, I strongly encourage you to maybe revisit those VODs on architecture or object-oriented programming or the basics, mastering the basics of code. They might make more sense to you. Okay, now the last piece that I want to talk about is this inner circle piece. And I wanted to talk about this because I think it also follows this degrees of separation, and because we just did this this video on the inner circles yesterday, which if you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend you check it out. Mostly for those of you, I think, that don't see necessarily the same value in inner circles maybe that I do. If you're uncertain about that, this hopefully will shed light at least into how I think about it. Okay, so with the inner circles, I think oftentimes people might be considering the inner circle as, I have my inner circle, and I don't necessarily want to create conflict. So you might be nervous to boot people out. It might be challenging to pull people in because that might take work. Both of these things can potentially be growth types of mindsets, right? You're going to grow in one way to go in a separate path. And again, this is not, just to be clear, with the inner circle stuff, I don't view it as I am better than someone else or you are better than someone else. It's a deviation of paths. It's us just moving in different paths. And so this morning I was working on some of these shorts and I was rewatching that longer video, and I came to these two ideas which I kind of hint at in the inner circle. And one of them was this notion of one way you can potentially determine if people in your inner circle align very well with your life goals is to share your life goals with them and see if you get degrees of support or degrees of pushback. And if you want to know more about this, like, I recommend watching this short or this short. I think both of these talk about this in some capacity. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this with the degrees of separation is that initially you may be thinking about your inner circle like it's just people that I know and I'm aligned with, and I've had them in my life for so long, and I'm just going to kind of roll with the punches. But you might not be thinking about degrees of separation. So the first piece is like, well, they're with me already, and so for the short term, this is acceptable. But what about this midterm? Like, now think about this. Think about these circles now as barriers to overcome. Okay, for the inner circle. These are barriers to get beyond. All right. Now you want to do something incredible. You want to, if you're watching this channel, you probably have growth mindset. You're someone that, I don't want to use the word ambitious, but you're seeking to do incredible things, be exceptional, be anomalous, push yourself in new directions. So you're going to try to get beyond the short term and get to this next circle, which is going to make you better. Whatever this is going to be your next life goal. Now, in order to do that, you're going to have to pass through this filter here. This filter, in some ways, is your inner circle. The question is, are they going to allow you to pass through? If that inner circle, I think, is supportive of you and they're aligned with your life goals, I think that they absolutely will. They will encourage you and want you to go here, even if that means it takes you potentially away from them. And oftentimes, if they're traveling the same path as you, they're heading here as well. But if they aren't, and I've seen this personally, when you share your life goals, and keep in mind, like a key thing about the inner circle, at least for me, is that these people are there to support you with your dreams, not try to limit you on your dreams. But if they feel threatened about you moving in this direction because it's potentially a departure from where they are, largely because you have a growth mindset and maybe they don't, I can almost guarantee you these folks here are not going to be super thrilled with you moving in this direction. And in fact, keeping them around can stop you from getting into this, because that negative speak, that negative feedback, that, oh, well, you'll never be able to achieve this, Lisa. Don't try to push the boundaries. Like, why isn't enough? Right? Why do you have to go do this next thing? Right? Like, in my mind, that's the whole purpose of life, is to be moving forward. And again, I'm not talking like crazy stuff, but this idea of small footsteps every day, just like this stream. It's just a single stream. We've only been doing this for 90 minutes. I'll survive. All of you will survive, but it's growth. That's what we're doing. And when you do this iteratively, it, I think, makes you better. It takes you to the next level. But in order to do this, I think you really need an inner circle that is not going to challenge you on every time that you want to move forward. Because that negativity, I think, will, like, having the wrong people whispering in your ear, it can be poisonous. And again, this is not a judgment on these people. It's about a difference in your paths, that if you have a growth mindset and they don't, and they really like you, they can see that you're going to start going in this direction that maybe they can't follow. And unfortunately, this can be very challenging for certain people, is that sometimes people can be selfish. Sometimes people can be self-interested, and they are going to choose their own comfort over what's best for you. And so what we talk about in this VOD, wherever it is we talk about this test that you share one of your most aspirational dreams with people in your inner circle, just to see how they'll respond. And if you get positive reinforcement, and it doesn't need to be like unequivocal, like positive reinforcement of, oh my gosh, you've got this, go do this. It could be like, I love this, it's super great. Now, what about like how you could navigate this? Like, what are the consequences? How will you do this? Like, that is actually a degrees of separation analysis. I think that's totally fine to weigh the pros and cons. In fact, before I left Intel to create Merly, I did this very thing. I went through the pros and the cons. And then after I had them all drawn up, it was just very clear, like, oh, the pros clearly outweigh the cons. I'm going to do this. So that type of analysis, I think, is fine. But if the default reaction that you get from certain people is, yo, you shouldn't do that. Like, even without understanding what it is that you're trying to do, no questions, right? Rather than, oh, can you explain this more? I'm a little nervous for you. I think that can be healthy, but just this ardent sort of, no, don't do this. I would strongly encourage you to consider finding other people for your inner circle, or at least have conversations with those people to understand, okay, I want you in my inner circle, but for you to be in my inner circle, I need you to be supportive of me. I need you to understand this is something I've deliberated on. This is something that really matters to me. And I'm going to do this. And if you want to remain in my inner circle, then you need to be supportive of me and not just try to shoot down my ambitious ideas. And the truth is, this is one of the key things that I've used to prune out my inner circle, is that along the way, as I've tried to do more and more ambitious things, again, if you're watching this, my belief is you are someone that is exceptional, that you have in your mind, you want to do things that are of impact, and you're willing to put in the work. By definition, you are an anomaly, which basically means you're going to have periods where you may be walking alone. You're going to have periods where you're going to have to be okay being the anomaly, and understanding that you being an outlier doesn't mean that that's bad. It's actually just reinforcement that you are an outlier, right? That's actually probably why you'll go on and do incredible things, but only if you have this positivity in your inner circle. And for more on that, I strongly recommend you check out this one video that I think I somehow was able to pull off in something like 30 minutes, mostly because I was very inspired that day about some of the negativity. Look at this, 21 minutes, where I basically just go in and explain, if you want to achieve, I think, greatness, you really have to figure out how to stamp out negativity. And either that's maybe negativity in your mind, negativity in your inner circle, negativity in the news or the social networking, all of that stuff, just get it gone. That there's psychological studies that show that, I'm probably like spoiling this, but the higher order bit is the psychological studies show that it's more important in terms of people's success that you have less negativity than more positivity. So let me say that one more time. In order for people to achieve higher degrees of success, what the studies have shown, and this kind of makes sense to me, is you will essentially be more successful if you have less negativity rather than more positivity. So I'm not saying don't be positive. Be positive. Again, if you're a Jeter, then you're probably already super positive. But I don't know about your inner circle, which is why I'm mentioning it, is that the challenges that I've had in negativity almost never come from me. They come from some of the folks that, and again, it's not a judgment. I realize I have crazy ideas. I say things that are just a little bit absurd, but then I go on and I do things that are absurd because I have absurd ideas in my head that I try to achieve. But if you never try to achieve greatness, you never will achieve greatness. It's so obvious. And sometimes we just need somebody to tell us this. And so hopefully, if you're in that spot, I'm that voice to tell you, you can do this. You can achieve greatness. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be an incredible amount of work. You're going to have to do this constantly for years, maybe decades. You're going to have to not be distracted. You're going to have to be everybody's punching bag and not hold grudges. There's just like so much that you're going to have to suffer through. But if you're willing to make those sacrifices, you can do it. You can do it. I'm some degree of evidence that it can be done. And I'm not the smartest person in the room. I'm constantly surrounded by people that are smarter than me, that know more than I do, that had maybe better gifts. But one of the things that I think have as a superpower is I do this, and that I do this. I just don't care. And I try very hard to have no ego. And so when I embarrass myself, I don't care. This is why I don't edit these videos. I make mistakes all the time. Like, here's an example. In this video, I misunderstood Lisa's question. I'm answering the wrong question. She has to jump in and say, oh, no, that's actually not the question, right? I'm not going to edit that out because I want everyone to understand, like, failure is good. Failure is a sign that you're growing. You should embrace those failures. Those failures are your battle scars. They show that you've gone through battle. They're hardening you to make you tougher and help you grow. So, oh yes, absolutely. So Lisa's comment is, a lot of this revolves around being grateful. Find it in your life, even small, and it will take you far. And I actually have, so one of the things that I do is I can be judgy sometimes. And again, the reason why I do this, I've discussed this before, is I'm not thinking I'm better than the rest of the world. That's not it. It's that I view things as being so simple that then when other people struggle with things that I think are simple, I get confused because I'm like, why? I don't understand. Like, why was this hard? And then I can get judgy, and I need to not do that. And one of the ways that I have tried to address this is following Lisa's advice. Is I try to practice this empathy, and oftentimes when I start becoming empathetic, I end up being wildly grateful. And so it turns into gratefulness. And when you're grateful, what I find is it's very hard to be judgy. It's very hard to be angry. It's very hard to be petty and hold grudges and be distracted. Like you just generally are thinking about the good stuff, the positive stuff, not the negative stuff. And so 1,000%, I agree with you, Lisa. I think that's absolutely fantastic take. So with that, we're 10 a.m. Pacific time, and I think I hit the topics I wanted to cover. I actually, just to add a little bit more clarity, I thought I wasn't going to do a stream this morning, but then I got so inspired by some of the things that I saw, like this Instagram. And again, like I actually liked his video. I don't disagree with his initial take, but I think that it's just focusing on this. And I think that when you start to think about it a little bit more, you can see these bigger implications. And then, as we were mentioning last time, I wanted to discuss the TechCrunch article on windsurf and Anthropic. So I was basically able to find a way to create a story around all the core topics that I want to talk about. So with that, thanks everybody. This has been super great. Feel free to share any thoughts on other streaming topics that I should cover or VODs, and I'll add them to the queue. And until then, thanks so much for joining, and best of luck to you. Keep staying positive. We got this.